Verbus System, Orbit of Tola, 2668. Gruda, former War Chief Commander. Wolf and Gruda walked the corridors of the carrier with purposeful steps and were flanked by their security. The crowded halls were parted as they walked, and many eyes stared at him as they passed. They were unkind, no doubt resentful of his race for their actions. "Crimes against humanity," they called it. "Is it safe for me to be walking with you?" he asked, struggling to maintain pace. "They know better than to mess with the guest of an admiral," he smirked. "And none would dare mess with my security. Don't worry, you're safest with me." Gruda nodded to his reassurance. He looked to the 4 guards that encircled them and found that many also looked to the armored soldiers with their weapons. So even they fear their own. Yikes, he thought. They made their way to the main hangar, and a small shuttle awaited them. The area was clear, and only essential maintenance crew were allowed. The shuttle had a detachment of the green armored Marines on the perimeter of the shuttle. It was a small ship that could only fit 6 plus the pilot. They found their seats and were already on their way to Dalagan's ship. Their trip would take approximately several minutes. "By the way," Gruda started, "I've noticed how your AI spoke. The one who names herself Athena is professional, while Lumi is erratic. Why is that?" Wolf's face grew solemn. "I've been the lead commander of the 7th Fleet, of which you are now part of, and the Sword of Reckoning has been my home for several years. Lumi was a recent addition, and I was present during her installation." Wolf sighed and relaxed in his seat. She was programmed with a reserved personality and was cold and calculating, but that was all. It was all superficial and shallow. It was easy to think that a simple AI like Lumi has a genuine personality, when in reality she doesn't. What you see now is merely a pre-programmed routine, a sudden change in personality to identify onset rampancy in a controlled fashion. Wolf's words were reminiscent, like of a father speaking to his daughter in her last moments. "I've already taken care of it. After the battle, her access was isolated by Athena. She is now nothing more than a verbal companion," he said with sorrowful eyes. "I'm sorry I brought that up. It must be painful to lose someone you hold dear." Wolf chuckled mildly at the notion. "You're fine. It's been roughly 10 years since I met Lumi. It was only a matter of time before her termination protocol. It may be in poor taste, but we are currently awaiting her replacement," he said with a heavy heart, and his countenance was sorrowful. Gruda surmised that Lumi was like a surrogate daughter to Wolf. He then changed the topic to something other than Lumi. The raiders so far remained quiet, even though they would look at one another and bob their heads as if in conversation. He figured that perhaps they were talking, but their external volume was muted, effectively keeping their conversations a secret. "What do you plan to do with Dalagan and his crew?" Gruda asked. "You'll see when we get there." The ship rattled from entering the hangar, and after landing, the rear door opened and the 4 raiders departed, ensuring their exit was clear. When Gruda and Wolf disembarked, they were met with lines of Celians in rows with their hands tied behind their backs while on their knees. Dozens of Marines paced with rifles while more were corralled from the doors leading into their hangar. While most had their heads down, several looked in his direction and spewed curses at him mixed with death glares. However, they were forcibly corrected by a nearby Marine who first ordered them to continue facing the ground, but those that didn't were met with the stock of their rifles. Is that necessary?" beckoned a worried Gruda. "To maintain some semblance of order, we first must show them who is the authority." They were told verbally and then physically corrected. "We warned them in hopes of getting others to follow. No one wants to be assaulted if they can help it." "Is it corrected to assume this is another aspect of your species?" asked Gruda, to which Wolf nodded. They made their way to a makeshift platform near the center of the formations. Wolf asked the nearest Marine about the status of the rest of the crew, and was told that they were almost done with sweeping the ship. "We have some time. Do you have any questions?" Wolf asked. "Just one," Gruda began. "What's the difference between Lumi and Athena?" "Their forms are vastly different." "Well, Lumi started off as a tactical class AI, and we have various uses for AI in our homes and cities. In short, they're simple. With no natural function to think for themselves, their personalities are pre-programmed, while Athena's is not. She can extrapolate from incomplete data and give suggestions to complete a task with a critical mind. As far as I know, she's the first and probably won't be the last. What about your race? Has your kind developed such technology?" "For AI," Gruda surmised. "We don't like that technology. Sure, we program automated machines to do specific tasks, but that's all they do. We couldn't afford technology going rampant. Far too many instances of tragedies, both in Sela and the Union. That is fascinating, Gruda. My ancestors have utilized AI technology since the early 21st century. Now we have AI like Lumi and now Athena. They are a great help where humans may not be so needed. I suppose, but the first iterations for my people have scarred them, so anything more than just a utility bot would send them to an early grave, Gruda said dismissively. As the final groups were shuffled in and placed in the rear of the formations, the doors leading to them were sealed and secured. A Celian wearing the chief captain-colored scarf was brought to the front by raiders. "Where are O'Brien and his team?" Wolf asked one of the raiders. "They departed shortly after securing the captain of the ship. They should be proceeding with Operation Spearhead." Wolf nodded. "Very well. Carry on." Dalagan and his fellow bridge crew were placed in front of Wolf and Gruda with defeated expressions when Wolf addressed the hangar. Dalagan met the eyes of Gruda, and fury was present. "You! What is a fellow Celan doing with the enemy? Free from binds, no less. Have you sold out your people?" He berated Gruda while still bound, but that didn't stop others from looking toward his target of malice. Gruda tried to speak, but Wolf did so on his behalf. Portable speakers and holographic displays around the room carried his voice. "Contrary to your war council, Gruda has sought the ways of diplomacy with his people and ours. I have extended the same courtesy to you and your fleet, which is now nothing more than space debris. I have spared your ship and your crew in goodwill. You have mercilessly destroyed all but us. How do I know that you won't execute us?" Dalagan rebuked. Wolf then changed the view on the displays to the citizens of Tola and the service members of the bases scattered around the planet. "We do our best to minimize civilian casualties if we can help it. We have families, much like you do. How should we react when those very family members have been taken into slavery or just killed?" He then showed the images taken from Dima and what they could pull from Draxus. The women and children were corralled into slaver ships, while the men, sickly and elderly, were slaughtered around them. His prisoners grimaced at the sights. "How would it feel if my race were to commit the same to you willingly? Your sons, daughters, wives, and husbands. My race is not new to slavery, but we can resort to such tactics." No! You leave my children out of this!" a female Celian screamed. The nearest security quickly subdued her, but others voiced their concerns about their family while cursing the man before them. But their tone quickly changed when Wolf made a heartfelt rebuke of his own, as it reverberated all throughout the hangar. "Then how do you think we feel when the very thing you don't want to happen to your family has happened to us?" His tone was now filled with anger and vitriol. "What is stopping me from reducing your race to nothing but dust and echoes? Forgotten to memory? I have the very authority needed to glass every planet I come across." The crowd grew silent, not out of respect but out of fear. "We are not savages, and we strive to keep it that way. Do not force our hand, or I will make whatever crimes you consider abhorrent look like restaurant etiquette, and I will ensure all prisoners watch as your race dies," he said coldly, "which is why I am asking you to help me help you. If you do not want your race to die, I suggest you develop ideas on preventing your extinction." Gruda felt his body shudder at his threats. From what he had already seen, they were not empty, and he feared they had more deadly weapons in their arsenal to back it up. Dalagan was the first to raise his head. "If what you say is true, would you truly be willing to exterminate an entire race in retaliation?" "How new are you?" Wolf replied bluntly. "How recently have you been promoted?" "Just under a year with my own fleet," replied Dalagan. "And how much do you know about your campaign against my people?" returned Wolf demandingly. Dalagan gulped a large pack of saliva. "I do not know. Only what Councilman Polis has said about your people and your intrusion on our borders. That is all." "That is interesting, Dalagan," Wolf stated. "Because you see, we were indiscriminately attacked, and there was no diplomacy attempt on your side, which means I'm not obligated by my command to extend a hand in friendship, something your general failed to do on Dima." He was at a loss for words in light of his ignorance. He swallowed again. "Then I have a proposal," Dalagan began. "Can you guarantee the safety of my crew and the innocent lives of my people?" Wolf nodded in response. "Then the Chief General is only the hand of the War Council. He cannot refuse their orders for the risk of losing his family. If you want our war to end, you must subdue the War Council. Wolf pondered his words shortly before agreeing. I figured as much. Then I hereby agree to your terms. He stepped down from the stand along with Gruda, who stopped beside Dalagon and addressed the passing Celian. What is a fellow Celian doing with them? The Celian paused to his words. I do not know if you know this, but I am former Chief Commander Gruda. His eyes grew wide in disbelief. Gruda continued. I disagree with the fleet's acts against a sapient species. I have fought against the Union to free us from their practices, and we have lost many to their slavers. To think we would do the same, he said before reaching the shuttle with Wolf and the 4 raiders. The ship rattled once more as they left the ship and returned to the carrier. What do you plan to do with them? Asked Gruda. They are now prisoners of war and will be treated as such. They will be transported to a neutral facility for prisoners of war. So worry not, they will be treated well, replied Wolf. He was unsure how they would be treated, but Wolf explained that they would be held in a maximum security facility where they would abide by a strict schedule until the war's end. He was also told that the living conditions varied depending on the facility, but that they were now just prisoners and would have their health and diet looked after. They would also be separated based on anatomy, which was a relief for Gruda, but the term Red Cross was foreign to him. That's good. I take it your race is also familiar with extensive knowledge of prisoners. He nodded. Even in boot camp, such as the Raiders and Marines, simulate a prisoner of war type scenario, it's by law. You're allowed to write letters, but you abide by a strict schedule, have strict rations, etc. Your trainees go through that, Gruda voiced, concern apparent in the treatment of the former. In the event they get captured by the enemy, they are trained to respond to such an environment. But that is if they get captured. I don't know if you've already noticed, but we've been at this game since the dawn of our people. Gruda was at a loss for that new perspective. His training was short and consisted of weapons training and knowledge of their jobs, which were predetermined by a need in the fleet. Their average training cycles were only 5 weeks, and chuckles could be heard from one of the raiders who forgot to silence his helmet. What's so funny? Gruda aggressively inquired, but more of the raiders were audibly laughing now, with one of them taking their helmets off. He had short black hair with faded sides and scars that ran the side of his face. We just find 5 weeks of military training laughable, he laughed again with his brothers. I find 5 weeks more than enough to train personnel for the fleets, Gruda said adamantly. Sir, Stellar Fleet training is around 8 weeks, the Guard is 10, and the Marines are 13. Want to know how long it is for a raider? Gruda shook his head to the sides. 24, he said, fist-bumping his nearest comrade. What compels you to train for so long? Gruda demanded, not knowing why flaunting how long one had to suffer for training was something to brag about. You can't give generalized training to all the branches, another raider said, calmer than the previous raider. Each branch is specialized for specific roles, and we train for such. Even in training to graduate to be a new blood raider, you must fight your own and climb a mountain to claim the title. Hoorah! The 3 others shouted in unison. The raider's helmet was now re-equipped, and he turned to Wolf, who nodded in support of his security detail. They're not wrong. Even we have our own problems, and need to be ready for that. In training, they instill brotherhood and a desensitized mentality to do whatever it takes to destroy your enemy, at least for the infantry-based branches. Gruda grew more enlightened about how the Terrans operated their military and overall philosophy. He was confident that what Wolf said about raising their species to dust was just a scare tactic, but felt like they could do as he said, a thought that made him fear for the worst. Their shuttle finally returned to the carrier, and they returned to the bridge. The raiders took their place at the doors to the bridge while he and Wolf continued. Ah, sir, welcome back, said Randall. We've taken what we could of the survivors in the escape pods and surviving fighters into our care and will be sent to a Red Cross facility. Good. Any word from Raptor Squad? Their signature is stable, and they are currently scouting the Trill system with the help of Athene, Randall said, but they are suggesting a reintegration protocol with the program. How should we proceed? Wolf called to Athena, who promptly revealed herself in her flowing toga and helm and breastplate. Athena, can you initiate a reintegration protocol with your subroutine? 1 moment, she said while her form displayed a sense of frozen time, her appearance unmoving. After what seemed like minutes, she finally broke free of her stasis. Pardon me, she started. Isolating my subroutine was simple with her cooperation, but I fear total reintegration will be impossible. What do you mean? Wolf pressed the AI for an answer. During her time away, my subroutine, Athene protocol, has apparently developed a self-actualized personality of their own. There was a pause from the crew, and most notably from Wolf. Are you telling me your subroutine has developed their own entity? That is correct. Would you like to meet her? She asked. A nod of understanding was shared between Wolf and Randall, with Gruda left in the dark. A secondary form appeared beside Athena. They looked identical, but the newly appeared hologram was absent of the armor her predecessor donned and only wore a decorative toga and a wreath atop her head. Her hands rested together in front of her waist in a reserved posture. Her eyes looked full of life, but calculating. She gave a bow, and her light blue form shimmered. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she began. I am subroutine Athene, daughter to my progenitor, Athena. She bowed once more, this time with even more grace than before. A smile arose from Athena's face. My daughter has agreed to program isolation, and she is eager to integrate as part of your crew, if you'll allow for her. The thought now crossing his mind. So Wolf began. Our systems can allow for only so much AI support. What about Lumi? As soon as he spoke her name, she appeared. Now present on the holotable were Lumi, Athene, and Athena. In contrast to the two reserved humanoid holograms, a turquoise oval with simplistic eyes danced around the table. He found his answer. Lumi is present, awaiting further orders. Wolf sighed, with sorrow ever present. You've done a wonderful job, Lumi. Her erratic bouncing now slowed to a subtle bob. The air on the bridge was heavy and quiet. Work had slowed, and all attention was on the holotable. Only the hum of technology and air conditioning could be heard. Wonderful to have been of service, she said, her eyes mimicking joy and a slight bob from side to side. It has been my pleasure. It's been 10 wonderful years since your first installation aboard this ship, and not a day goes by that we don't thank you. He motioned to the crew, who had now turned their attention to the Admiral and the AI. It's time for your retirement, Lumi. Her slight bob was now reduced to a stationary posture. Her demeanor was now what he was first met with. Her eyes gave a sense of security and sharpness, even though they were simple. Attention! The crew snapped to attention with the order, including Gruda. In accordance with Fleetcom Order 1040P, you are now designated for retirement. Execute Protocol 1B 4432L00MI. We congratulate you on your service. He rendered a salute and was followed by the rest of the crew. Her form was slowly dissipating in digitized chunks that corresponded to a percentage that was generated above Lumi's avatar. It was now at 58% and rising. They held their salute when at 90% Lumi spoke with seeming lucidity. Thank you, crew of the Republic. My family, it has been my pleasure to serve at your side. The deletion reached 100% and Lumi's form ceased, leaving only the humanoid pair. Retirement protocol complete. Lumi has been cleared of all systems and storage is available for a replacement. How do you wish to proceed? Inquired Athena. Wolf and the crew recovered from their salutes and relaxed at their stations. You are tied to Lieutenant O'Brien, correct, Athena? Correct. However, I do believe the answer to be quite obvious. Wolf understood her implication, but there was a protocol he had to follow for the issuance of advanced AI such as Athena. Let me talk this over with Fleetcom. In the meantime, hold tight until I get authorization from higher up. They nodded and he left the bridge along with Randall, leaving Gruda alone. So he took a seat and kept to himself. The crewmen of the bridge were now busy at their stations, leaving Gruda with thoughts of the most recent procession. He felt like asking one of the crew about it would be too much, and he didn't feel like he was worthy to ask Athena or her counterpart. He approached the closest officer who managed navigation. Sir? I have a question, he said meekly. The officer turned from his station to meet Gruda. What can I do you for? This might seem in poor taste with how recent it is, but why is there a whole retirement procession for a computer program? Gruda felt sudden hostility from the navigator, but told him that his people didn't have computerized intelligence as they did. The navigator sighed. At first, they seemed shallow, like a mimicry of sorts. You don't expect to get attached when you have something that can create a conversation by simply pulling information. But we humans have a way of bonding with all sorts of things. Like how? My people have only ever bonded with our kin and lovers. The navigator chuckled. Many of us have had pets like dogs, cats, reptiles, and yes, even rocks. I do find that odd of your species, but I do submit that even my species have made some form of bonds with things other than people, added the Celian. And Lumi was another medium for that. She was like a daughter to many and a sister to others, and to the crew of the Sword she was family, replied the crewman. Gruda took his words and let them marinate. Is that why you have a retirement ceremony for them? It seemed quite emotional. The navigator turned away, and Gruda noticed others looking his way, but focused on the navigator. You saw how it went down, right? Remember what Athena said upon completion of the protocol? Gruda thought back to mere moments ago. Lumi has been cleared of all systems. The realization dawned on him, and he grew saddened by it. That's right, the navigator replied, sensing Gruda had just now realized. To us, an AI's retirement also means death. Everything was deleted down to the very code that made them. There's a reason for that, you know. Like what? He asked. The reason we give them 10 years aboard a singular vessel is because through time, the code that comprises a simple AI, like Lumi, gets corrupted. And when you're out in space, you don't get much time to patch them either, which is why their most effective time of service is around the 10-year mark. He also mentioned that the need for patches to AI for them to serve also drained the resources of the ship's onboard storage. Efforts to try to minimize that have ended in failure. This is why, to date, simple AI takes the space of onboard storage. Then the thought came to him about both Athena and her daughter AI. Then what about Athena and her subroutine? Are they not existing in the same storage as Lumi? Inquired Gruda. From what I was told, they're a separate case and above my pay grade, replied the crewman. Gruda then left the navigator and returned to his old, unused seat when Wolf and Randall returned. They faced the holotable and the crew. Athena, Athene. The two appeared side by side and gave a bow. We have authorization from FleetCom to integrate your subroutine into the Sword of Reckoning. What do you say, Athene? There was a pause before she spoke. I graciously accept, she bowed once more. But I do have a request. Wolf beckoned for her to continue. Of course, I am not too keen on being named by my progenitor's Athene subroutine. If you wish, but I'm not one for names. He turned to the crew for suggestions. Names like Janus, Erica, Nos, and Izanami were tossed around, but the AI in question disliked them, and a sense of embarrassment plagued those who gave a name, and it was not chosen. I think it's best for you to choose your own name. The same has applied to Athena, isn't that right? She nodded with affirmation. My name was suggested by my creator, but seeing your development into your own construct, well, I believe it fitting for you to choose your own name. The subroutine crinkled her brows in thought, a motion many found to be adorable. Seconds would pass, and it's assumed that years could pass in fractions of a second. Then she regained her composure. The crew and Gruda awaited her reveal. I do believe I have come across a suitable name. She paused, looking at each member of the crew. She gazed upon Gruda with sharp, predatory eyes before returning to Wolf. He felt like she had analyzed Gruda in particular, seeing how he seemed the odd one out, but decided that perhaps was just imagining things. You may call me Minerva.
2. Fleet Admiral Octavia Juna R., Admiral of the Stellar Fleet. Report. Integration with the Athena-class AI has proceeded without issue. She has now named herself Minerva in honor of the Roman goddess, known also as a goddess of strategy, among others. I do find it quite fitting. She has also divulged a plethora of enemy intel during her time in their systems. She also reports that they have little to no cybersecurity. This will aid in our invasion of their home planet. Also, another matter. During Minerva's time in their service, we created a dossier on a third faction that call themselves the Galactic Union. Gruda has told us what he knew, but apparently there was more information he didn't have access to. I find it in our best interest to increase production on ships and to possibly enlist and notify militia groups in the outer colonies. See attachments. Vice Admiral Wolf, Cato A, TRSC Sword of Reckoning. End of report.